Welcome to Michael, Chase, and Kaylee for this discussion about A Little Night Music, in particular, Now, Later, Soon, which happens in Act 1, Scene 1 of the musical. But before we get started talking about that, I want to ask you each about something that Sondheim was quoted as saying in 2003, which is, every time I see A Little Night Music, I trudge in like a schoolboy to class. Then I'm always surprised by how much I like it. It never fails. What do you think he did so right with this that schoolboy could suddenly be converted into a happy theater goer?
Let's see. Well, okay. Well, I'll give it a shot. Okay, a few basics. Love story. Um, Funny. Um, Heartbreaking. Uh, Ugly. Ugly, funny, heartbreaking, even sometimes in the same scenes. Um, and it ends well. It ultimately ends well. So I mean, that's a full play. Sometimes you can get the romantic comedies, great, or the full-blown wonderful, wonderful. That's great too. That's an entertainment. But to get a really complicated and at times dark story to also be incredibly entertaining, and because of the different ages of the love stories, to speak to people at different ages in their lives is a really deft piece of construction. Then there's Sondheim, and there's also the fact that this book, I mean, I have to say, I've done mostly plays or film or TV, but the musicals I have done, there are a lot of musicals that the book is sort of not as tight. This book is the language connected to the period. This book is a great book. I mean, not a good book. The scenes are complicated. They work. So it's a full meal. I mean, it's a feast. It's not a snack. Those are my thoughts.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you, Michael. I think it's interesting because I think we're similar in that way. I think a lot of the cast is similar in that way where I've come from a drama background, but done mostly plays, Shakespeare, Greek, and film and television. And I love musical theater when it's great. And I think Sondheim is the highest level of where complexity in terms of telling a story through music is communicated to an audience. That to me is the type of musical theater that's interesting to me. And it's interesting to see how the world is changing with that too. But when you get your hands on something like A Little Night Music, it's a treat because they don't come around as often as you think they would. It's musically it's amazing. The book is fantastic. The characters are rich and complex, and it's exactly right, Michael. It's a full meal, and I think this attracts actors. It doesn't just attract musical theater performers. This is a type of show that attracts actors to do it well.
Yeah, and I would go off that as well, saying that it's one of those shows that I had never seen put on fully. I had listened through the music in musical theater school. Obviously we're all familiar with it. It's a classic, and musically I was familiar with it, but I was not familiar with the book. And so you kind of go into it thinking, what is this about? What is the core of this, I think? And the great thing that I think Sondheim does, and that the book does, is that it's about humanity. And going back to what Sondheim was saying about it, about how you go into it thinking, oh, okay, what am I going to feel about this? Or what am I going to think about this? And you leave thinking about different levels of humanity and how people interact with each other. And I think that it's attractive to all people, and it's attractive to all ages, and it tells a story about people. So you can come into it thinking, okay, but what's the through line? What's the story about? And you leave I think really, really loving it and really feeling like you connected with something, because the characters are well written and easy to connect to.
Well, the reality is the story's about us, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't that ultimately the point?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Absolutely,
I think so.
absolutely. And also, I think another mark of a great writer. I mean, you look at any great story. There's no sort of every character in this play has a it circumvents tone. There's no like tone of the characters. Every character, whether they're the more silly ones or the more dramatic, whatever whatever tone might one want to attach to a character type, Sondheim circumvents it, and the book writer circumvents it. So it's a roller coaster.
Hmm.
In the best way. Every time you think, and every character gets a moment. Even the silliest ones have dignity. And without that, this could be a very silly story, and it could absolutely be played for the high comedy, and it would be very entertaining. And then, of course, finally, as all the great writers knew, the women are the smartest ones in this play by far. We as the men, perhaps not with Henrik, because he's the only truly honest one, besides probably the daughter in the play.
Yeah.
He's a real truth teller in a way, and perhaps more, but certainly not me. But the women are, thank God, or if it wasn't for the women, their tolerance and intelligence and forgiveness and those things, the men would be pretty screwed, because I'm not sure we deserve it.
For anybody who hasn't seen A Little Night Music, Michael plays Fredrik, who is the father to Henrik, and Kaylee, you play Anne, who is Fredrik's new wife, with whom Henrik is in love.
Yes.
Couldn't be more complicated, but there we have it in a nutshell. Now, the opening 15 minutes of this musical are very different. The overture is done with a cast on stage with chorus members on stage doing themes and some of the lyrics. Then there's a brief dialogue scene. Then we're introduced to your three characters in a sequence that I think is absolutely stunning, called Now, Later, Soon. Sondheim regularly talked about how you need to let the audience know in the first few minutes what they can expect musically and story-wise from a musical. What does Act 1, Scene 1, in which Now, Later, Soon appears, tell us about the show that's going to follow?
That's a good question.
I think I would say initially it tells you that the story is going to be told from more than one perspective, and that it is about the relationships between the characters rather than one specific character, I should say. So a lot of times you are set up with, here's the main character, here's the focal point, and here's their story, here's their beginning. And I think the difference in the way that Sondheim and A Little Night Music sets it up is that the focal point is the relationship rather than the person. So, and you hear it both in the words that are spoken and musically, how when we all come in together for the end of that trio, we each have our own sections of it, now, later, and soon. So we each kind of tell our own story, but ultimately the thing that is most interesting is how they overlap. So, and you really get that towards the end of the music and how it's written. So there's a lot of back and forth between my sort of section is soon, but one of the big swells in the music lands on the word now, and there's sort of a switch. There's sort of flips throughout that music, and I think it's meant to highlight that the relationship between the characters are what's going to be the focal point and what's most interesting, rather than following one individual through their story.
Do you think this is, and maybe Chase, you can handle this, do you think this is a very interesting twist on the whole idea of a musical having to have an I want song? Because this is sort of the I want moment for these three characters.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting. It does kind of remind me of an I want song in that it's all, I don't know. I think I'll start with later. as that pertains to me, but I think it's for sure a soliloquy. It's for sure a moment where, when, you know, the cliche of why we sing, of when dialogue can't do anymore. There is something about the music when I think between all three of those songs, for those people, there is something that drives that character forward, where we are seeing the beginning of why we need all of these things. For Fredrik, you know, the understanding of is this relationship worth it to be with Anne during this, you know, conflict of she being a virgin and him wanting to stay in it. For Fredrik, you know, he's constantly told later, how do I handle this? Will anything begin? I don't know. Who am I? You know? And then for Anne, you know, it's, you know, the opposite of Fredrik. Is this, you know, soon I want to, but, you know, I'm not sure. It is I want, but I think it's all wrestling with, do I want? It isn't I want, but I think they're all coming to terms with, am I wanting it? You know, I don't think it's a for sure I want, at least before they begin. They might have a clearer answer by the end of their songs, but I think it's for sure a coming to terms with what they want.
Well, it's interesting because Sondheim called each of these three pieces inner monologue songs, in which the characters describe their deepest thoughts, almost never singing to one another. What are the challenges for each of you? And Michael, I'll let you go first. In creating your own monologue for each individual song that will guide the audience and the characters through the trio that follows when all three songs are sung together.
Can you ask me that question again?
Yeah, what are the challenges in creating your own monologue, since Sondheim has described, you know, each of these three pieces as inner monologues? What are the challenges in creating that monologue so that that monologue for you is clear and for the audience is clear, so that when all three songs come together, we can still keep track of what each person needs and wants?
I want to answer that in two ways. I guess first, briefly, in terms of your first question about what is, by the time we get to this trio, which lands with the word Desiree, which of course pops her right into our consciousness, which is where we're about to go, which is just a brilliant piece of storytelling. We know that we have a group of people on stage that are going to start interweaving throughout the piece. So he's introduced the quote unquote Greek chorus. Now that's interesting for us, but for an average audience member who doesn't necessarily know anything about Greek theater, it's not remotely interesting, and it's not relevant. It's only relevant in that we have this presence on stage that is not us, and it's not the orchestration. It's not an overture. So he's introduced a style that's lush, that has introduced actual songs, that has made period very clear. And so that's what I believe he's done, even before we get to the first scene. By the time we've gotten through those scenes, you've already been introduced to something essential about our trio conflict. And it's all, as people always, who knows this play, I didn't know it until I heard it at the first rehearsal and read it, the triangle relationships, you know, and this is one of them. So in terms of storytelling and letting the audience know the kind of night they're in for, it's very smart. By the time we get to the trio, we have a very strong sense of what the conflicts are that they sing about anyway. And then in terms of the inner monologue, I guess it's like any Shakespeare monologue. I mean, with verse, it's rare that you have subtext, so to speak. You have an inner life, but you say what you mean. And you're sharing a secret with the audience, so that they know a secret about you, which creates the underbelly of all the action that comes after. And so the audience is in on a secret sometimes that you don't even fully know. Fredrik doesn't know that he mentioned Desiree's name. So, you know, my job as an actor, one is to make damn sure the song is clear, because the words are always the most important thing. It's more important than what I'm feeling or his words are always primary. And to marry myself to those words and do it in such a way that they have a crystal clear idea where I and this trio, where we're at, and we're interweaving because we've got to this complicated relationship taking place. That's about love, longing, hunger. And so we know this is going to be a sexy, hungry story. By the time we get to the end of that trio, all those things are in play and we're sort of ready, hopefully.
Yes.
Well, then let me ask you about getting ready for something like this. Do you each rehearse the individual parts of your song and then come together, or is it rehearsed as one piece?
We've been doing it. We started doing it mostly individual. And then this week, I think Michael was the one that kind of suggested, like, hey, before we run this in its entirety, I think we should come together and run the unison section, because it does get, I mean, obviously so complicated musically, but I think just before you go into something where you're so focused on your individual section of that song, it's so complex for each of us that by the time we get through with those individual sections, it's nice to have that refresher, you know, right before we do that act one run through or whatever, that we just have that unison 3-part thing in our heads, so that when we get there, we're there or closer to having that fresh, you know.
And I'll also add that I can't speak for the boys, but personally, I find it a lot easier to sing the trio section with the other 2 parts. It is very difficult to sort of rehearse the trio section specifically on your own, because your part is based on what you hear the others sing. So it's definitely, I find it more challenging to sort of do it just by yourself, whereas I can time it so much easier when I hear the boys singing their parts.
Oh, that's so interesting. I'm the exact opposite. That's actually fascinating. That's interesting. But I've been like, I feel like since we've like this week been running it all together, I'm like, oh, like when I'm hearing my part in my ear at home, just me, I'm like, I got this. And then I'll hear you guys and I'm like, oh, I do not got this. I gotta go back and measure 24 and 48 and whatever. And I gotta clean that up and whatever. And then, but doing it with you guys, I feel like is where I'm like, actually like, okay, now I know what I know and I don't know, you know?
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's like a duet. It's like with trio, obviously far more complicated, but I think a great point made is that it's a kind of a conversation, not a knowing conversation, but there are parts as we're going through it, suddenly we'll hear a part that we've sort of heard before, but then Sondheim lays in a few lines or something that jump out from one character. And then you have to sort of know as you're singing it, once you begin, you can relax, you know, the notes and the rhythms. When somebody else has to come through, when you sort of lean back, and then when you need to push forth because there's something that needs to pop there. And then at the end of it, to actually be able to really listen to the music. Because that music is an underbelly of what we're talking about too. It's not a separate deal. So it just takes time to get to the point where I'm still, you know, sort of hanging on with white knuckles when I do it, to get through it and hopefully. So that it just takes time. You can't do it all at once, and it gets ugly and messy. Then we get it right, but after a while, it's like the 3 of us doing a waltz together. It's just boom, boom, boom.
Yep, totally. And I think with that too, like lyrically, if you look at it, just the text, you know, and you don't even listen to the music, there's moments lyrically where you know this is a sub tangent, where it's a smaller thought than what's you know, in 5 measures from now, which is a huge defining moment for each character. That's written in there, you know, where moments are just smaller and you know, okay, that's an internal thing or a throwaway thing over here that he's just discovering, and that thought leads to the big discovery here, which is sometimes does so well, he musically pairs those thoughts with the bigger swells or the smaller things with the smaller swells, and you know, it all comes together so beautifully. But that is also the trick, I think, especially yours, Michael. I mean, in now, you know, there's so many, here's the thought, and then that reminds me of a little thought, and over here, and then I'm back over here. I mean, there's so much
I mean,
text.
for the most part, when we're singing together, I try to encourage these guys just to be quiet because my part is a lot more important than theirs. But I'm still having a hard time with that, you know. Um, and they're not very good singers as well, so that makes it hard. But they'll get there.
Well, Kaylee, I want to ask you something specific about the character of Anne, because Sondheim said that amongst his mistakes in his career was writing Anne for an octave and six range, which he did because Victoria Mallory, who originated the part, could accomplish that she could sing the low ends and the high ends. Plus, Anne has to go very high in a weekend in the country. He said, "I straitjacketed all subsequent singers into this rare combination." Is he right? Is it as challenging as he fears it
I
was?
just want to say before you say anything, she has no trouble doing that. So he may indeed be right for like mere mortals, like limiting the pool of the people they can hire to do it. But she absolutely can because she won't say that about herself. So I have to say she's extraordinary. So now you can answer the question.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. No, I think I absolutely know what he's talking about, where it's a wide range, and a lot of the things I would say you have to be ready for, you have to sort of expect. And it's Sondheim, so it has a sense of quickness and a sense of patter that is difficult to sing the higher it gets, I would say. But I am very lucky in the fact that I feel like I have a little bit of experience with that, not to bring in a different composer, but being in Phantom of the Opera for a little while, I would say Andrew Lloyd Webber, especially with the title song, it's so you have to access the bottom and then you have to access the top. And so I think I got very lucky in that I inadvertently had been sort of trained to do that for a while. So I do completely understand what he's talking about, but it's honestly a lot of fun. It's fun to do, and it stretches you in a way that is exciting.
That's good. Well, I can't wait to see it on opening night. Chase, a specific question about your character. You know, Henrik is, by his own definition, dammed up inside. He's repressed. What is the work you have to do so that all that repression is palpable for the audience, yet is never demonstrative, thereby removing that whole sense of repression?
That's a good question. I think, you know, Henrik, what I had to do when I first read the book, of like, where is this character going? Like, what does he want? And what he wants more than anything is actually to be outside of being dammed up inside. He doesn't want to be, he is, and he doesn't know how to get out. He's confused. He bumbles through a lot of the show, and that can be tricky because he's not graceful with so much of his interactions on stage, whether it's in his interaction with Petra when he's trying to sleep with her and he gives into the temptation of sex, which is his big conflict in the show, or his outbreak at dinner. You know, he has so much on his mind. He can't stand these people out in the country that are all just, as our director put it, but it has knives through the whipped cream, you know, with smiles on their face, taking jabs at everybody. And he can't stand it. You know, it drives him insane. There's so much that he has inside that he wants to get out, and he lets it break through in certain moments, especially in Act 2 during that dinner scene. I really want that moment for me as Henrik. That should feel different. Like the audience should not know that Henrik was capable of getting to that place. And when you see it, it should be shocking. You know, that damned well bursts, and you see a pivotal point. The apex of Henrik's arc, to me, is in that moment, and then when he kisses Anne, which are two moments that are completely opposite. One is out of complete frustration about the world that he's been so repressed and blocked, and then the second is the love that he won't allow himself to have. And finally, he gets to the point in both of those instances where, especially in those two scenes, the audience should, I hope, will get a sense of allowing themselves to see, or I guess to feel the release that Henrik is feeling. To feel that, oh my gosh, here's a person that needed love so bad and feels it, or here's a person that needed to say what he meant so badly about why everybody is so, obnoxious, and he says it explicitly, to his dad. He's never had that conversation before. So I think there's a couple moments in the play where I just want him to be clear and defined. I just don't want it to be murky, where the entire time we see just a guy sort of complaining and sort of stuck,
Which is important for somebody who wishes death upon himself at the end of the trio.
Right. Yes. The stakes are very high for him.
Absolutely. All right. So Michael, you mentioned how brilliant it is that the last word in the trio is Desiree. What does that tell us about the journey that Fredrik is on through this show, and how does that take us to who Fredrik is in the dialogue section that is in the middle of Send in the Clowns?
Oh, you're a lot smarter than I am. I'll tell you that right now. Let's see. It's a hell of a question. Okay, just in terms of basic storytelling, we hear about Desiree, boom, so we know what we're up to next. We see what happens at the theater. When you're talking about Henrik's character being repressed, there isn't a single character in this play. I mean, you could rehearse this play as though we all came into rehearsal and we wore a coat of armor. And then the play rehearsal, we were going to rehearse this play as though each scene tore away a chink, tore away a piece of that armor, until at the end of the play we were exposed. And for the first time, we understood something we discovered something, which is brilliant. And for each character, that only happens at it doesn't end until the very last second of the play, that for their arc, the penny drops, their eyes are open and they see what they were missing, which is glorious. Because then the audience they're in the know, even by the end of the scene with Desiree and I. Once we have that first scene, we know my wife is 18. We know we know that conflict in that very before the trio. I'm married to a very young woman. We know that my son is in love with her. We know that she's at sea. Right away, we know that I go to Desiree. All the pieces are in place for that part of the story. We also know that Desiree is unfulfilled with her life. There's a seed of that planted in the sea with her and I. There's something unfulfilling. I'm unfulfilled. Suddenly, these two animals get into the same place again, and whatever's going to happen is going to be sexy, dangerous, funny. We know that by the time Carl Magnus comes in. So by the time we're done with Send in the Clowns, he's done what he did again. 14 years ago, I broke her heart. And it's cruel what he does. I come to the country. I didn't have to. We got this invitation. I didn't have to do it. Desiree and I did sleep together, but I could have said, that's actually probably not a good idea. Ann and I better not show up there because, I'm not thinking really above the waist. That's not a decision. That's a logical decision. It's propelled by desire, hunger, animal. That is part of what Desiree and I have. So what happens? That all the chaos begins to take place. I end up in Desiree's bedroom, and we're just that far to say yes. And I say, but. And what I say is incredibly cruel. A woman who could save me? Absolutely. But I just can't stop thinking about this little girl, who loved me so much when I was, so lost. And I can't do this. Even after I came there, I came up to a room, and it's and that's what brings us to Send in the Clowns, and we think it's Desiree's with the and me with the most inept thing of saying, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have done this, after I see how I've ripped her guts out again. So for us to end up together at the end, it's an extraordinary thing. And I guess the only other thing I want to say is I think it's important to remember to listen to how many of the times the word death is brought up in this play. And it struck me yesterday as I was listening to it, I was just sort of clocking each time it was said, because I don't think you can't really experience a fullness of love or of growing through, we all go through whatever extraordinary events we go through in our lives. There is a death. There is a kind of death and grieving. You leave something before you can get to the other side of something. It's not pretty. It's messy. And everyone has to be stripped completely down before we see each other, admit exactly who and what we are, and we actually see each other. And then when we see each other, after that all falls away, it's fantastic. And that's what I think Sondheim does so brilliantly. So we're just, us and the audience are just hungry. Wake up, wake up, wake up. And we finally do, thank God.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really moving I've seen, I think, 6 different productions of A Little Night Music so far. So Pasadena Playhouse will be lucky production number 7 for me. I don't know, Kaylee and Chase, your full resume's history, but Michael, I know you appeared in Merrily We Roll Along at the Kennedy Center, which means you are perhaps the Sondheim veteran amongst the 3 of you here. Have the 3 of you had conversations about what both the challenges and the rewards are of singing his music?
I don't think so. I haven't. Have we? I don't think we had that. Maybe you guys did.
No, I haven't had that conversation yet. But
Well, now you have something else to talk about next time you're all together and not via a computer. One other thing I want to ask about Now, Later, and Soon is if you're paying attention as an audience member, the person who wants now becomes the person who is singing about soon. The one who wants later is singing about now, and the one who's singing about soon is the one who is embracing later. What's the journey each of your characters takes to get from what you originally sing about in the beginning to what you ultimately sing about at the end of the trio?
Well, I can't speak for the other 2, but for me personally, I think there is very much a moment that I sing during the trio that I am playing as acceptance, because I think Soon is sort of her struggle, kind of like what Chase was saying, between what she wants and what she thinks she wants and what she wants to want. And then sort of the end there being a realization or an understanding that those things are different for her. So I think at the end of the song, you sort of want there to be some big resolve. It obviously gets turned on its head a little bit with like the very last line or the last couple lines. But I do think that there is a character arc of greater understanding of one's self. And that's kind of that monologue that you see play out, is kind of, again, what Chase was saying about how you start something being like, this is what I think I want, or this is what I want to want, and a better understanding of the character by the end of, and here's what's happening, and here's what I've decided. So yeah, I think we each go on sort of our own individual arc, but personally, that's what I feel like Anne is going through from the top to the end.
Yep. I think it's exactly what you just said, Kaylee. I think it's like, yeah, because I think, and it also relates back to that topic about death, but it's the stakes rise throughout that final crescendo with all 3 of us, and it gets to the point, I think, for Henrik, where he knows that he hates later. He hates that nothing ever begins. And then the word he says in repetition is soon. Soon, come to me soon. If I'm dead, I can wait, but I want to live now. I'm ready for things to start. Soon, 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 soon. He says it 4 times. And it's a big moment musically, I think, too, where it's the slowest part I have in even the solo parts of the song. I have a repetitive whole page of just soon, 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 soon. And that's a huge arc of a song to go from I hate what this feels like right now. What do I want? I want things to start soon. And eventually, I think beyond the context of that song gets to now. You know, I think he gets to I'm ready. You know, I think you slowly start to see his journey there.
I don't have a my hope, even if I'm stepping back and looking at it as a director, even physically, my hope is simply, you know, those three words are primal. Those three words have everything to do with conflicting desires of when you're ready, when you're not ready. I'll do it if, when, later, soon. But the words themselves are primal and they're hungry. And if you see three, I will be happy if the audience hears what we said, is clear about what each of us are going through. And we do get our own song specifically to reference those words. But then at the end, you see three really hungry people at sea, just primed. But I'll be happy if that happens.
I think also, Michael, you just kind of like made me think too, like, I think the actual words of like now, later, and soon, like they're all about timing. And once you get to like the lyrics and Send in the Clowns, it's Send in the Clowns, it was my time wrong? Like what was my time up? You know, did I start too late? Was it too early? Like, did things just not line up? And I think it's so relatable as an audience member, but I think everybody wonders those questions. You know, it's that, you know, I think there's a movie that Linklater did or something, but you know, it's like if I would have gotten off the subway when I locked eyes with cute girl in the station, would my life have changed? If I would have made that decision instead of this decision, would my life have changed? If I would have just started earlier, would my life have changed? Did I miss out? Do I regret what I didn't do? Will I regret it if I don't do it? I think everybody has a version of that in this play. I think it's a huge through line is timing. And now, later, and soon are all huge timing words, you know, for different reasons.
So to conclude our conversation, in the prelude to Act One, Madame Armfeld tells Fredrika about the smiles of the summer night, that one smiles on the young, the second at the fools, and the third at the old. And I know we're just in the early stages of spring, but how does it feel? Does it feel that a summer night has smiled on each of you? And how is that reflected in the opportunity to appear in A Little Night Music?
Can you say it again? Say it again.
Yeah.
Well, in the prelude,
Yes.
Before Act One, Madame Armfeld tells Fredrika about the smiles of the summer night.
Yes.
One smiles on the young, the second on the fools, and the third on the old. And my question for you is, even though we're not in summer, how is the summer night or even the spring night smiling on each of you, and how is that reflected in your appearing in A Little Night Music?
I think that's a beautiful question. Really beautiful question. Thank you for asking it.
Thank you.
I'm a lot older than these guys. So I've been really lucky in my career to get to do a decent number of pieces that I would call both a feast and that we did it right, which is rare. I mean, I think sometimes you can consider yourself lucky if you've been in a couple of those, because I've only seen 3 pieces of theater that were so memorable. The rest, lots of good, lots of great, but 3 that were seminal and just blew me away because they were so human and surprising. And all I can say is, after COVID and everything we've been through in these last years, to get to this play is, like I said, it's a feast. And if we do it right, it's going to be a feast for the audience too. But being on the inside of it, to get to play this part, to get to go on the ride that this guy goes through, being middle-aged myself, and telling a story, as all great love stories are, about coming back to life. that's a great story to tell. And for it to be a romantic too. And I mean, that's a great story to tell right now. It's always a great story to tell. So it's maddening how hard it is, this piece, at times. And I love every second I'm there. I don't ever forget it, how lucky I am to be doing this play, how incredibly talented. It sounds like a cliche, but I sit and I listen to the singing, to the skill of the voices and the acting, and I think, holy shit, this is how lucky am I? And you don't always feel that way. That's how I feel. I can't wait to battle it out every night on stage in front of an audience. It's going to be glorious. So that's what I have to say.
I agree. I agree completely. And I think that's what I was going to sort of mention, is that I feel that we've all been smiled upon with the casting is fantastic. Everyone has been nothing but a joy to work with. I feel like I've learned so much from just watching and observing other people do their scenes and go on their journeys. And that everyone's fantastic. And more than just the leads or people who are sort of, you're watching their characters grow, but like even the chorus sound amazing, and they're so dedicated to it, and it's going to be beautiful. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the people that were brought into it. I feel very very lucky, and that this group of people has the potential to create something that is beyond a lot of times, I think.
It's great. I think for me, it's like, I always want to run towards projects that scare me, and this one for sure. We didn't even mention the cello, but I mean that was, that this show has challenged me so much already. And it's those types of projects that you get into and you're like, I hope I make it out. And I know if I do, that I'm going to be so much better, and it's going to make my art better. It makes me think about art better. It makes me strive to be better. I think the writing in this is what Michael said. It's a feast, and it's when you get to go to work every day and dissect, and there's always more. That's what makes me feel like I'm smiled upon. I've done TV and film, for the last couple of years, where a lot of the times you're there to do a job, and there's always work to do, but sometimes it's not as at the complexity as something like this. And it's really refreshing to be on stage again for me, and to be reminded of why the chops in theater are really why people go to the theater, and why some of the best actors in the world start on stage and continue to circle back to the stage. There's nothing else like it at all.
One last thing I want to say is was simply that I think a lot of people in Pasadena know it already, but what this artistic, the institution itself and the leaders of this institution, I think we have 28-piece orchestra for this. That's you just don't almost see that anymore.
Unheard.
I'm sorry?
Unheard of. Yeah.
Coming out of COVID, to have somebody doing a musical of this size with an orchestra like that, with all the other things that Pasadena Playhouse is doing in terms of community outreach, keeping this place alive, not only alive, but vibrant and thinking forward. It is, people always say that, when you talk about the jewel of an institution, it is extraordinarily unique. So when you talk about feeling like you're lucky to be somewhere, I never lose sight of the fact that this is a really special place that has a primed mission, which, as they've said, is to bring these pieces in and to do them full throttle. And you just don't see it much anymore. So beside the fact how welcome they make us all feel. So that is absolutely part of feeling like you're lucky to be somewhere. So, yeah.
Well, terrific. This has been a really fun conversation for me, at least. And I can only imagine that this conversation would be very different if I were asking you these questions in the last week of the show.
Yes.
So, Kaylee, Chase, Michael, thank you very much. I look forward to opening night and have a great time with the Little Night Music.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.